I have often wondered why there seemed to be a stark difference between the patterns of behavior in poor black communities versus poor white communities. I was curious to find out if the pathologies found in these black communities were in a way related to the history of slavery, oppression, and legalized discrimination, and if these behaviors were born out of the hostile environment African Americans historically found themselves. To help me in this quest, I brought Professor Robert Cherry, an economist, to help me make sense of these issues. In this conversation, he offered his thoughts and opinions on a wide range of issues including gun violence, honor culture, the origins of black culture, charter schools, welfare and welfare reforms, the war on drugs, and so on. Enjoy the conversation. These same pathologies, why don't you find them in poor white communities? If you say white supremacy is not the cause of it, why are the issues starkly different between poor black communities and poor white communities?
Well, because, they get hooked on opioids. But the issue of gun violence, where, a lot of the gun violence in the US, the majority has nothing to do with gangs and committing crimes. It has to do with somebody pissed you off. You're not going to take this shit from that person. He said something about my girlfriend. I wasn't invited to this party. There's a lot of that. There's just a distinct black male subculture that's not in the white community. So that when these white men drift off from stability, they don't have jobs, they don't have girlfriends, they go, they just take drugs, they play video games. They just don't have that edge that's in the black community, where a slightest kind of grievance can lead to violence. I mean, that's why this Will Smith thing was not some marginal thing. It reinforced a certain view of black men that, we're not going to take that shit, and we're going to resort to violence. So, I mean, you have that in New York and other cities now. You have all of these street violence. Some of it is guns, but a good deal of it is homeless people who have mental problems. But you would think that every homeless person in New York was a black person if you looked at the news, because they're the ones that are beating up an Asian woman, smacking down a Hasidic Jew. I don't want to go off on this, but I think there's a kind of subculture that impacts on a modest number of low-income black men, where there's a macho violence as a default for dealing with conflict or when you're pissed off. And it's just troubling.
Thomas Sowell would say that a lot of these kinds of behavior come from hillbilly white culture. He made the case that what you call the black subculture actually came from a certain part of England and all that, even from white people. Is there any veracity to that, or where do you think this culture comes from?
There's like this honor culture where whites used to fight duels over trivial crap, and this kind of honor culture. And I mean, I don't know why it's there, and I'm not sure it would help solving it, but the main thing is there's an incredible avoidance of dealing with this. So, for example, school policies, 3 to 4 times the rate of black suspensions is 3 to 4 times the white rate. Immediately, the notion is it's racist teachers and racist schools. Not even looking into the household. There's just an avoidance of looking at it. And until we start to look at it seriously, Now, how much of it is these chaotic families? How much of it is the gun violence they see all around them? This whole notion of bullying. There's, until we take it seriously, I'm not, I'd be the last person qualified to speculate on this. But what I'm saying is, this is a serious issue in explaining a Black underclass of men, is how they deal with conflict. And, what's depressing is nobody, other than maybe on the right wing, are even willing to admit that it's there. That everything is white supremacy, implicit bias. And I mean, I'm trying to get published a paper that where there's a group of academics in New York City who interviewed 250 Black boy adolescents, 16 and 17 years old, who carry guns. And it was just the most apologistic explanations for why we should feel, we should see these kids as victims. We shouldn't enforce gun laws. And the fact, I talked to somebody about carjackings. In Philadelphia, there was a carjacking of a congresswoman. And I spoke to somebody who said, well, it shows how desperate Black young men are. Not that there's something wrong with what they're doing, but it's just a manifestation of poverty and racism that they do this. That's how do you answer people like that? I mean, it's what they think and what they believe, and they're just unwilling to look at what's going to improve the behavior of these young Black men so that they can succeed.
What if I was to make this argument that the reason why this black culture, black subculture even developed in the first place was because of segregation, lack of opportunities to black communities, redlining, Jim Crow, and all those other things, and such that they found themselves in a very tough, hostile environment, and it was survival of the fittest, and this just became a culture. So can't we trace it back to the the history of oppression and suppression that black people have gone through in America to explain why these things are happening? I'm not saying it's
Well,
an excuse, but it's a possible explanation, don't you think?
well, there's an argument. Cornel West, who's a liberal left Black thought person, he says that there's just a nihilistic attitude among Blacks that, after generation of ending up in the same place that your parents were, living in the same crumbling neighborhoods, that they have just a nihilistic attitude. And it then leads them to lash out. And who they're going to lash out at? They're going to go into some white neighborhood and kill some whites. They live in these neighborhoods and they just do it to people they know who piss them off. And so there's certainly an argument that sees this intergenerational deep poverty. Again, it's a subsection of, we're talking about maybe 20% of the Black population. We're not talking at most. We're talking about a particular small segment. And now they drive behaviors, because if you live in one of those neighborhoods and you got these kind of kids, you're going to have to be a tough ass yourself and not to be taken advantage of. So it kind of snowballs into affecting many more people who just for their own self-survival, have to take on a certain demeanor. But again, I think the problem is public policy from the Democrats. You can't talk about this. What I'm saying, if this gets out, they're going to be, people are going to say that Cherry is a racist, right? I mean, you know the world we live in. And so hopefully none of my friends will see this, but it's just impossible to put any blame on these Black young men who have very difficult lives. You know, growing up in chaotic families, going to not necessarily the best schools, not having the best diet, having gunshots in their neighborhood, traumatizing them. You know, they could be sympathetic people. And so it's a fine line between saying that they should not be allowed to do what they're doing and being sympathetic to why they're in those situations. And so I think, you know, particularly if you have the more conservative people who say, who have no sympathy for them at all, and just want to say, you know, we should go back to throwing 16 and 17-year-olds in jail, et cetera, et cetera. You know, it's just a very difficult environment to say what should be done. And what I'm saying is we should at least be aware that this is an important issue. And then we can begin to look at what can be done about it. But we're not even at that stage to look to what can be done about it, because it's not there.
But don't you think that it's because of a lack of opportunities in these communities? If there are no jobs, if there are no infrastructure, if the education is crappy,
I
and
don't think
all
that.
that.
So, for
Okay.
example, Black, the employment rate, the share who are working in paid employment of Black men 16 to 19, what's called teen employment, is at record levels in the United States now. So if you're a 16, 17, 18-year-old Black kid and you want to get a job and you present yourself in a way that an employer will say, I'm going to take a chance on this kid. You know, if you come well dressed and talk in an appropriate way, you can get jobs. Now, you're not going to be a millionaire, but you can get jobs. Much of what I write about now is that the problem is liberals want to force everyone into a 4-year college degree track. Everyone should go, when probably at least half, but probably 3/4 of Black high school graduates don't have college skills. So they flunk out. You have about a quarter of Black men, 25 to 29, have been to college but have no degrees. So I think occupational tracks, some of them are pretty decent. Certificate programs, there's a whole range of tracks in occupational and occupations that are viable for people who have weak academic skills. And particularly these certificate programs lead to stable full-time employment. So I think one of the major problems for this country is that liberal policy is to force everyone into 4-year academic tracks, either in community college where they do their first 2 years and go on to the 4-year college. And it's just impossible for a substantial number of those high school graduates to go on from high school into an academic track and be successful. Now, they could get a certificate program when they're 18 and 19, and when they're in their mid-20s, they have more maturity, they have experience, then they can go back to college. But to throw 18 and 19-year-old kids with these weak academic skills into academic tracks is like putting a gun to their head. But all these liberals think they're doing wonders because they're giving everyone the opportunity for a 4-year degree.
My question is, why are blacks performing so poorly academically? Is it that they're not getting a good educational foundation? Because if they are getting the same, I see this as a foundational problem. Probably their earliest years of education, the background is not solid. So you're not going to expect such people to do very well when they get to college and all that. So what's happening? Are the schools not funded properly, or are the quality of the teachers not good? What's
Schools are
happening
funded probably. New York City, Philadelphia, Baltimore, Chicago, LA are the most heavily funded schools. Now, they're not funded as much as suburban schools, but they're funded very strongly. That's not the problem. The problem is that they come from these problematic families. They come from these neighborhoods where there's gun violence that leads to a certain level of trauma. And there are not support services that go into the families. What is needed is much more social services that go directly into the household. They give advice to parents. A lot of these, we're talking about, a 23-year-old, 24-year-old woman having a first kid. She's not that educated. She don't know that. She's coming from a broken family often. She doesn't know exactly what to do. So there are nursing programs where people go in and they help these young mothers shape out a strategy for raising their kid and moving their own lives ahead. And then there are programs for 4 to 6-year-olds that make them school ready. I'm not talking about required childcare. I'm talking about in the family, because you have to get up to snuff the parents in what parenting should be to get their kids on track. Again, this is paternalistic. Liberals don't like it. You're going into these and you're telling these people that this is what you should be doing. Now, the fact is, a lot of these programs are successful because the parents want that. They're getting services that are helpful to them. But from the liberal standpoint, you're being paternalistic. You're imposing values on these people. So that's what has to change. And there's also the whole issue of charter schools in the United States. Charter schools are incredibly effective because they're no nonsense. They don't allow behavioral problems that the public school does. And they also engage the parents in ways that the public school doesn't. I give in this book that I'm finishing up, I give the example of, let's say you want to go and do exercises. You're overweight, you're whatever. You want to do exercises. It ends up, however much you want to do it, things get in the way, except if you get a trainer. If you go to a gym and you have a trainer, that trainer gets you to fulfill your aspiration. And that's what charter schools do. They're the trainers of the parents. And they get these parents to be the kind of parents that they want to be. But you can't do that in the public school system. It's paternalistic. It's and you got the craziness so if you look at performance in charter schools, they're dramatically better than the traditional public schools. So the approach in this country is to stop funding charter schools. Biden has a new bill. The federal government modestly funds charters. They've changed the conditions for charters to get it that essentially won't allow charters to get it. I mean, they've set up rules that you can only have a charter where you have schools that are overcrowded, so that the charter is a supplement. In poor neighborhoods, those schools aren't overcrowded. Parents are fleeing those schools. But now under Biden, his new rule, you couldn't set up a charter school in those neighborhoods. So, I think liberals are criminal. Black parents want charters. No, they are, because Black parents and Latino parents, they want charter schools. Liberals don't, and the teachers union don't. Black parents want more cops in the neighborhood. Liberals don't. And, so in the name of helping people, you don't give a shit what they think. You know what's best. But somehow, what I've described as being paternalistic, what they're describing is just social justice policies. I'm getting depressed here. I'm going to have to get a drink pretty soon.
Let me see if we can do a thought experiment. You feel that these liberal policies, democratic liberal policies, are the ones that are responsible for some of this decay. What are the measurable differences in Republican run majority Black areas as opposed to Democrat run majority Black areas? That's what
Well,
I wanted to see,
in
if
areas
it's
that are
the liberal
Republican
policies that actually follow.
run, you have obviously much more sympathy with charter schools and private schools. So that's helpful. The other thing is that during the pandemic, they didn't close down their schools. That's most famously in Florida with DeSantis. Florida schools were open throughout the entire pandemic. And rather than having the disastrous impact of closing down schools in the major urban areas run by liberals. Because they weren't getting any education. They didn't have any ability to go on Zoom. Teachers weren't trained to do Zoom. It was criminal what was done in the name of protecting teachers. That's who it was. Wasn't, kids never were at a high incident of getting a serious COVID. At least in the United States, there less kids under 17 died from COVID than died in a typical flu season. So I think those are two of the major differences in the past. But I don't, and I think there are also much more Republican or less liberal cities are much more attuned to occupational training in high school that leads to vocational programs post high school, post secondary.
In terms of welfare policies, in what ways do you think welfare can work? In what ways do you think that the current welfare programs can be improved upon to benefit racialized Black communities?
Well, I think, again, there are welfare policies now in the US. The dominant welfare policies are this child tax credit, food stamps, and this thing called the earned income tax credit. I think that what can be done is make sure that these programs don't stand in the way of work and don't stand in the way of getting training for work. And there are ways that they can be improved to make work readiness and employment much more a focal of these programs. Certainly training programs. The government runs a whole bunch of training programs, but not for the population that we're talking about. For example, you cannot get student aid for certificate programs, a program that train you, get you a certificate. If you go to a community college, you can get student support. If you go to a 4-year college, you can get student support. But if you're going a trade route, an occupational route, which is not in credit bearing, college credit bearing, the government won't give you any aid. So that's an important area in which a change in funding and support can have a big difference.
So my last question is the war on drugs. What do you make of the war on drugs?
There's no more any war on drugs. It hasn't been a war on drugs for 15 years. The vast majority of Blacks who are in prison are there for felonies, for violent crimes. Less than 10% are there solely for a drug-related crime. That wasn't true 20 years ago, but that's the situation today. So that, and also the Black population in prison in the United States has been almost halved. So this idea that prisons are the new Jim Crow, this Michelle Alexander book of 12, 13 years ago, has no relevance today.